Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and T-Bone.
I need to take the credit, or maybe the blame, for what has taken place with Matthew Liberatore. This is on me. I'm sorry. I owe all of you an apology for what is happening right now. I thought, T-Bone, we were done with this. We got through like a month of Matthew Liberatore increasing the strikeout rate, looking like the best version of himself. Now, the ERA was still higher than you'd want it to be. But he was pitching like a guy that you could get into October. He goes 5 innings. You get it to the bullpen. You find a way to win. What Brandon Pfaadt was, what Trey Yesevich was, what these guys have been for their respective teams and their path to the World Series, I thought, okay, maybe Matthew Liberatore can be your version of that. Wrong. Dead ass wrong. And I am apparently to blame for this because ever since I said that, he's been awful. He has reverted back to what he was in the second half of last season. And T-Bone, now you look up. If I told you you can hit a button and every player in your lineup becomes Jordan Walker in terms of their offensive profile, you'd probably do that, right?
Yeah, that sounds kind of nice.
Well, that's what's happening against Matthew Liberatore this season. Jordan Walker on the year is now batting .290. Opposing hitters against Matthew Liberatore this year are batting .295. Jordan Walker this season is slugging .520. Opposing hitters against Matthew Liberatore this year are slugging .515. So every player in a lineup, when you get to their averages, they become Jordan Walker when they go up against Matthew Liberatore this season. I'm done. I could be done with this project today if they would allow for it, and I think there are viable alternatives. Where are we at this point with the Matthew Liberatore experience, T-Bone?
I think I'm with you. I'm at the point where I just don't know that I see any upside to continuing this experiment. I just don't see it with him. And I had cautioned while you were celebrating the little 3-game run, I had cautioned that, hey, look, anybody can go through a hot stretch, right? And that's exactly what it was for Matthew Liberatore. I agreed at the time it was intriguing because if that was what he was going to end up becoming, you could live with that. And it definitely played more in October than it would in the regular season. But I think what we saw was he was max efforting it, lost it there for a while, and now it seems baseball's quickly adjusted right back to the quick adjustment he made to baseball. I mean, you just look at the profile. I mean, it's there's not anything to point to that says this is going well, right? You peek under the hood and it's like, well, that's a lot of blue on Baseball Savant. You look at even his pitch profiles, okay? Is there something he compare with the curveball? The answer appears to be no. His fastball gets crushed. His slider gets hit well. His sinker, I saw that leave the yard yesterday against Arizona. There's just nothing to point to that says this is going well for Matthew Liberatore. And I don't understand the argument of, well, what would we do if we were to either option him down to AAA or if we decided to put him in the bullpen? What do you mean, what would you do? You've got 3 guys down in the minor leagues that are actually pitching well. This isn't last year where it was, hey, we've got Michael McGreevy, then a whole bunch of just old guys on minor league contracts that, let's be honest, we would prefer not to see here. That's not the case anymore. The pipeline is, this is why I was more excited about it coming into the year. It is starting to get to a point where these guys are developing and should be getting close to knocking on the door at the major level, if not already knocking down the door. I don't see the path to continuing this with Matthew Liberatore in the rotation.
I don't take any sort of pleasure in talking about it like this. Like, I wanted it to work for Matthew Liberatore. It would have been great for the Cardinals if he came out this year and proved, hey, the first half of last season was real. The second half of last season was just, he ran into a wall, which was natural. It was understandable. At the time, you could easily explain it away and say, hey, this is a guy that's transitioning from the bullpen. He's getting to levels, innings pitched wise, that he hasn't been at in, I think, like 3 or 4 years at that point in his career. And he's hit a wall. Like, he just doesn't have it any longer. Okay, cool. Yeah, I go into the offseason, take what you've learned, make sure your body's in a better place next year to be able to go the entirety of the season, and we'll see what it looks like. Like, that all made perfect sense to me. But now it's looking more like an excuse as opposed to an explanation. Because you look at it, and over the last calendar year, among pitchers that have thrown at least 100 innings, which is 129 of them. Basically, every team has 4 of these on average. So out of those 129 starters, here's where Matthew Liberatore ranks since July 1st of last year. 119th in ERA, 128th, in other words, second worst in expected ERA, 125th in fielding independent ERA, 127th in batting average allowed, 290, 127th in whip, and he has allowed one of the highest barrel rates in all of Major League Baseball. People are hitting it really hard. They're hitting it often. It's just not going well. There's nothing that I can point to in that profile and say, yeah, but at least he's doing this. No, walk rate's up, home rate up, strikeout rate is fine, but it's not something that I could point to with like Sonny Gray, who had a really good strikeout rate, even if some of the other numbers weren't where you'd want them to be. There's just not enough here to suggest, all right, well, it's going to get better. Here's why. No, none of it's there. The expected numbers are bad. The actual numbers are every bit as bad. And so now you look at it and you say, okay, what can the Cardinals do about this? Like, what's the plan? Because I think with Kyle Leahy, I can do with him what I did with Liberatore last year. Hey, he's making a transition. You see some moments. There are times where it looks okay. I understand sticking the course, even if maybe I would approach it slightly differently. I get it from the organization's perspective. We are now getting ready to go into year 2 of arbitration with Matthew Liberatore. He's 26 years old, and he's had 18 months to be able to have a runway as a starter. That is a very different situation. And now you do have Dobbins, you do have Quinn Mathews, you do have Brycen Mautz, who are making their way through your AAA system, who could serve as, at a minimum, viable alternatives in the rotation to Matthew Liberatore. And you've got a problem in your bullpen right now. So between all of those different things, this feels more similar to the Nolan Gorman situation than it does what's going on with Joshua Baez in the outfield. Where with Baez, all right, you've got guys that are crushing it in the corners, and don't look now, but Nathan Church has been awesome in center field lately. Gorman was not getting the job done, and you had questions about whether or not Blaze Jordan could figure it out at the third base position at the major league level. But at a certain point in time, you just got to try it. See if it's going to be better, because Gorman's been so bad for so long. The same thing is true right now with Liberatore. So to me, I think it's time to make the change, T-Bone. And if they decide, hey, we don't like our depth at AAA beyond, maybe it's Dobbins. Okay, then send Matthew Liberatore to AAA and allow him to work on this stuff as a starter at AAA. And see if it works that way, the way that it did with Andre Palante a couple of years ago. And if you're not willing to do that, all right, then fine. Let him work on this in the bullpen and get it figured out there the way that he did the last time, or the way that Kyle Leahy did last year. There are ways that you can go about this where even if they still believe in Matthew Liberatore as a starting pitcher, they can go back to that eventually. But for right now, there is too much urgency as you have 5 weeks remaining prior to the Major League Baseball trade deadline, where that's basically where the Cardinal season comes to an end for all intents and purposes. It's time. It's time to make this switch, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the point about what they have in the minor league system is the thing that is where I would say it's similar to what you said about Crooks and Church. You have options this time around, and it's not like these guys aren't on the 40-man. Now, Quinn Mathews isn't. They'd have to make a move there. But if the 40-man was the thing that we would hear a lot about at times of, oh, man, not on the 40-man, we'd have to make a move. Oh, well, guess what? 2 of the 3 that we've talked about are there. Dobbins is on the 40-man and is on turn with Matthew Liberatore. He started last night as well, the same night that Matthew Liberatore pitched. Now, it didn't go well, but they both threw on the same day. And Brycen Mautz has pitched as well. He's a guy that's on the 40-man that they have called up and were willing to go through even a rained out game. Instead of optioning him down, they said, let's keep him on the roster to see what he looks like. I don't understand what they're looking for here with Matthew Liberatore if they're going to keep him here. And of what you're saying of, look, man, your season is not the entirety of the year, right? This isn't once the 162nd game ends, that's when we know what the fate of the St. Louis Cardinals is. No, the fate of the St. Louis Cardinals is probably decided after the MLB All-Star break, I would say. Right around then, once Chaim gets done going through the draft process, which it's going on now, he will then turn his attention to the Major League roster and say, okay, are we buyers, are we sellers, or do we still need a little bit more time of runway here? they have until the deadline to determine it. That's why I'm with you. I mean, the season for them can potentially end on August 3rd when the trade deadline is. So I don't know what they see. And if their reports are coming from internal saying, hey, Hunter Dobbins, Brycen, Mautz, Quinn, Mathews, these guys aren't ready to be major league starters, they wouldn't be much better than Matthew Liberatore, I would be questioning some of the internal reports you're getting because they thought Blaze Jordan couldn't play third base based on their internal reports. So much so that when Urias went on the rehab assignment, they kicked him over to first base, and we said, okay, that's what they're going to do. They're going to keep Blaze at first. They've now got Urias as their replacement at third base, and Blaze has come up here and been totally fine at third base. So I would question some of your reports and say, okay, should we at least just try this and see? Because if it is bad, we can go to the next guy. We can, if say they try Dobbins first, all right, if he doesn't pitch well, we can either go back to Matthew Liberatore, or we can try Brycen Mautz, or we could try Quinn Mathews. And the other thing, if you go into your minor league system here, this allows you an opportunity. We talked last week on the Redbird Report of, hey, are there any guys that need to be called up to see what you have before the trade deadline? Because then you could get some answers on maybe we don't need to go shopping for this. Well, here's one of these scenarios. At the time, I didn't think it would be one, but it's clearly emerged of, hey, there's clearly a big hole in this rotation, and it's Matthew Liberatore's spot right now. So churn through some of your internal options and see if these guys can pitch better than Matthew Liberatore, or at least to that level, so you can maybe cut off shopping for a starting pitcher at this year's deadline.
This is what the last 2 seasons were supposed to be for. Now, not all of the answers that you get are going to be positive. We have seen some very positive responses from Alec Burleson. The opportunity that was granted to him, he has run with it, and he's not giving this back. He's been awesome. He's now on pace for 30 home runs, 40 doubles, and 115 RBIs this season. That's the kind of season. I looked this up earlier today. Only 10 other hitters have produced those numbers in a single season in the last 15 years. So for him to be able to put up those kinds of numbers, it speaks to he was worthy of this opportunity. They cleared an opportunity for him at first. He's taking advantage of it. J.J. Weatherholt, if you like wins above replacement, I know you don't, T-Bone, but if you do, putting together one of the best seasons by a rookie in the last 25 years. Top 5 is what he's on pace for right now. Jordan Walker, he got one more chance. This was it. And he's taken advantage of it, and now he's playing like a legitimate all-star. Nathan Church in center field, taking advantage of the opportunity that was granted to him. It's not to the same level, but I would even say Jose Fermin is one of these players, where there have been a lot of times in the past where we've said, hey, for a 40-man spot, just go ahead and DFA Jose Fermin. Not even worth having him on the roster.
I think I've gotten rid of him about 20 times in our conversations.
They decided he was a valuable piece, and he has taken advantage of his opportunities, especially against left-handed pitching this season. So, that is where you get the positives. On the negative side of things, sometimes it becomes Nolan Gorman, where the guy just doesn't work any longer, and you have to turn the page and go to somebody new after that many opportunities. Sometimes it becomes Victor Scott, who, despite all of the chances over the last 18 months, he's still not hitting, and Nathan Church has taken his chance in center field. Sometimes it becomes Pedro Pajes, where he was granted this opportunity a few years ago through the whole Wilson Contreras thing, where they decided he's not a catcher any longer. And then he kept that job for a few seasons as basically a placeholder, and he lost it this year because they had an alternative in Jimmy Crooks. That's Matthew Liberatore. You were granted this opportunity. The runway is not forever. You don't just continuously get to go out there. At least that's not what the point of this is supposed to be. If you don't take advantage of your chance, then somebody else gets that opportunity. And the Cardinals have done a really excellent job this season of giving those chances to other players and saying, if you don't get the job done, you'll continue to get some chances, but not forever, and then we'll go to the viable alternative. So that to me is why I'm getting a little, this is where my frustration will begin with Libby. Previously, I could always either explain it away, excuse it, whatever, but this was the start to me against the Arizona Diamondbacks, where I now view it as, it's time to make some decisions. His next start is scheduled to be on Tuesday on the road against the Atlanta Braves. Oh. How do you think that's going to go, T-Bone?
Not well.
I don't think that's going to go well at all. I wouldn't expect anything positive to come out of that start. I'm not excited about that. They may go with him there. If it goes the way that we're all fearing, and they choose to continue to let him have that start, that to me feels like Erick Fedde from a year ago, where it becomes the start that everybody has circled, And if it goes every bit as bad as we're all expecting, that's when you make a decision. I think that is the end date. We get to July 1st, it's time to make some choices on Matthew Liberatore.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going at least one more with him. And then I think is when they really start to have the conversation. I already think they might be having some of that conversation. I don't want to read too much into it, but, Ollie was on the Gas House Gang on KMOX and said, hey, he's on the roster. He's on the roster. We're going to be working with him. My Ollie Marmol translator went off and said, hey, man, I'm just coaching what I have because this is what Chaim is giving me. And until Chaim makes a move, I'm going to coach that guy. So that felt like the first moment when it was last year with Erick Fedde where it was, yeah, we're not going to name a starter yet, but we are going to have a meeting about who starts that game. And that was clearly okay, not everybody's on the same page as to what to do here with Erick Fedde. I think you're already starting to see that here with Matthew Liberatore. And I would add this into this conversation as well, and this is where I think it fit with Fedde as well at this point in the season. When you start to kind of envision what your rotation looks like long-term, right? Because this is still also a year of runway like it was last year, kind of to your point. Does he really fit into this thing long-term at this point? My answer to that would be no, at least not in the rotation. You might be able to convince me maybe long-term he's a bullpen arm. You know my thoughts on bullpen arms and trying to develop those for multiple years. That's ridiculous. But you could at least make that argument towards me. This isn't like this is some prospect that just got up here. This isn't like if they had Mathews up here and he was going through these struggles in the first year, not in the arbitration process. That would be totally different, right? That is a totally different conversation that is going on. So I think that they have to be asking themselves, what is the real upside of Matthew Liberatore here in this rotation in the long-term view of our build? Because it's been a year in which he hasn't pitched well, which means he's got to be falling down their list. If he was originally at number, say, 3 in the organization of how they viewed him, there's no way he's still at number 3 the way they view him in the entire organization.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the long-term plan, like Liam Doyle, I know it hasn't been the season that he was hoping for this year, but a lot of that is because he's working on his breaking pitches, which should help him have success when he gets here. I would think he's still number 1 among all of the pitchers that are currently going through the system. I don't know who the current 2 would be. Who would you say is in that spot right now?
I would say either Sanja or Mathews.
I would think those are the 2 guys with the
probably lean Mathews because he's closer.
Maybe Tanner Franklin?
I think he's moved his way into the top 5. I think he's probably 4th would be my guess.
Sure. So you've got those guys that we just mentioned there in some order or another. I think Michael McGreevy fits into that mix in some capacity. And then
I think Mautz fits into that mix.
Potentially.
As much as they've talked about him in years past to us, I would think he belongs in the, if not top 5, as someone that they view, okay, he eventually is going to work his way into the conversation.
And I think that's probably about where they're at.
Yeah.
And then Palante for right now is in the rotation. He's been good enough that you don't have to move on from him. He's about to get expensive sooner rather than later.
And honestly, Dobbins might be the guy that could fill that spot when he gets too expensive.
Yeah, and I didn't mention Libby.
Yeah.
So I think the hope was this year he could work his way into that conversation, or he would become one of those pitchers. He has done the opposite. He's fallen out of it. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes you have guys that work their way up, like Tanner Franklin. Other times you have guys that work their way down, and that would be where Matthew Liberatore is right now. Part of the byproduct of Matthew Liberatore not pitching well is the Cardinals losing these games. And it has a trickle-down effect, not only for that day, but also the next day when he's not able to get deep into games and the bullpen's fried going into a weekend series, for example, against the Kansas City Royals. Are we about to experience the exact same thing that we did a year ago? We'll get into that coming up on the Redbird Report. The Cardinals are through the first 78 games of the regular season. Their record stands at 42-36. If you had asked any reasonable Cardinals fan coming into the season, hey, you're going to get 78 games into the season, and you're going to be 6 games above 500 in the second spot in the wild card, would you sign up for that? Like every single one of them would have hit the button to say, yes, please lock it in. What do I have to do? And then if I had mentioned Walker's going to be hitting like an all-star, J.J. Weatherholt's going to be performing like an all-star, Alec Burleson's on pace for 30 homers, 40 doubles, and 115 RBIs. Lars Nootbaar comes back healthy and looks the part of a legit left fielder once again. Looks like he did 3 years ago. And you're going to have a good season out of Palante. McGreevy's going to be solid. Minor league system looks good. How you feeling about that as a Cardinals fan?
I would feel pretty good about that.
We'd all be thrilled, right? And that's where they currently are, which is why this season has felt so much better than a year ago. And yet, the record is the exact same at this point in the season as it was at this point last year. And it feels like they could be getting ready to go into a similar kind of spinning down the toilet bowl the way that they did a year ago. This time last year, they lose 2 games against the Chicago Cubs. Then they swept the Cleveland Guardians. You may remember that. That was when Sonny Gray had that unbelievable start on a Friday night. It was Apple TV. He's thanking Pedro Pages. They're walking off with a bro hug. It was great. And they sweep that series, and then they get swept by the Pittsburgh Pirates, and everything goes haywire.
At least the offense looked good in that series.
Did not score a run in the 3 games against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Things went south very quickly for the St. Louis Cardinals. T-Bone, are we about to experience the same thing? Where we get to this point, you're feeling good, but then as you get 3, 4, 5 weeks prior to the trade deadline, it becomes clear, all right, this is a seller.
I have a tough time with this because, one, I bought into last year's team and learned the hard way. But two, I think what makes them different this year is they've got something they can lean on, and that would be their offense. Their offense is better this year than it was at this point last year. And I think the big driving force behind that is 1 through 4 in the lineup. Yes, 5 through 9 has been much better since they made the roster change, but 1 through 4 has been top 3 in basically every statistical category across the board for the Cardinals this year. Last year, they were middle of the pack, and in slugging, they were bottom 5. And slug, baby, slug wins you baseball games. But the thing that is so similar is the pitching, as you kind of mentioned there. Like, you look at this bullpen is really starting to fall apart to where if I asked you, hey, you need 3 outs right now, who would you go to? I don't know, if you want me to be honest with you.
I think it's George Soriano. I don't have the confidence that I would like to have in that answer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd say Stanek, but if you said we're only up 1, I'd go, oh, not Stanek. He gives up home runs. So the bullpen's becoming very fragile. As you mentioned with the rotation, you've basically kind of got, it's a little different, but you've got Fedde and Mikolas in this rotation with Leahy and Libby. The good part is at least you've got 3 guys that are pitching well, but I do expect some more aggression coming for Michael McGreevy, considering his underlying metrics scream it's coming, and he just pitches to so much contact. And pitching's the thing that is the currency of baseball, right? I mean, it's the whole reason that when we sat here in the offseason, I said, man, this team's going to be bad, because I thought the pitching's not going to be there. Even if the offense hit, I thought, man, like, they're probably not going to finish above 500. And you're going into all of this in a stretch in which you didn't take care of your kind of get-right series, right? The Twins, you lost 2 of 3. You lost 2 of 3 to the Kansas City Royals. Those were supposed to be the quote-unquote slump busters, and he didn't take care of them. And now there's a chance. We're recording this on the 25th, so the day before the final game of the Arizona series. There's a chance if they play this game, weather permitting, they drop 3 of 4 to a critical team in the wild card race. And then Miami comes to town. And then you've got Atlanta, and you've got the Cubs. Like, this feels like it is that moment. The thing that does make me feel a little bit better about it is I do think the rotation's in a better spot with 3 guys that are pitching well. Mm-hmm. And the offense is the thing that should be able to carry them. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried am I? I would say I'm at like a 5. I think last year there was definitely signs when they got swept by Pittsburgh where it was, well, okay, this definitely feels a little bit different.
Yeah, and the rotation was just worse last year.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't have anything that you could hang your hat on last year the way that you can with the offense this year. Maybe the defense, you could argue, was that thing, but I think they're still a very good defensive team this year as well. And defense is just so much harder to build around. So if you've got good defense, but maybe not excellent the way that they do this year, and you've got top 10 offense in Major League Baseball, I would say, is kind of where I would put them right now. A bullpen that's a little shaky, and a rotation where I feel pretty good with 3 of the 5. Maybe not great, but pretty good when 3 of them are on the mound.
And if you were to make a change, like what we're talking about, and again, as we just talked about in the last segment, we don't know if it's going to come or how quickly, but if they switched out like Dobbins for Libby, for example, all right, maybe Dobbins kind of helps absorb some of that regression coming for McGreevy while also providing an upgrade over Libby.
And maybe Libby figures it out in the bullpen, right? The last time that we saw him in the bullpen, he was one of your 2 or 3 best pieces in said bullpen, and he can give you some length out of that area. He takes some of the pressure out of JoJo to go get some of those left-handed lanes that they go up against. So there's also a scenario where that works out. So I'm less concerned about that regression hitting them in the face the way that it did a year ago than I was at that point. I do think that the schedule is a real factor here, though. I mean, even if they were playing well, going up against Atlanta 6 times, the Cubs 3 times, and Milwaukee 5 times, that, for the best teams in baseball, that's a tough stretch, right? Like the Dodgers would face that and be like, oh, we could probably go a little above 500, but this is not going to be our typical stretch of baseball that we expect out of the LA Dodgers. So for the Cardinals, who are playing roughly 500 baseball against worse teams right now, that's where it gets a little bit uncomfortable. Because if this was a stretch that you were playing in April, you could recover from it. You're playing this stretch, though, in early July. And then coming out of the break, you've got 3 more against Arizona. We just saw that's not exactly a great matchup for this pitching staff. Now, your offense has been fine, but the pitching staff has struggled. And then you're getting right into deadline stretch. So that's where things get tough, man, is if you come out of this and you're a few games below 500 in this stretch, you found yourself, 4 games above going into the All-Star break? And if you lose 2 out of 3 against Arizona coming out, you're right back to where you were last year. And you could be playing much better ball, and I think this is a better ball club than it was last year, but it might not matter. If Chaim Bloom sees that and he's going into the trade deadline, he's probably going to stay the course of what they expected to be at the beginning of the season, which is selling assets for the highest bidder, seeing what kind of a return you can get for them.
Yeah, the tough part, and I hate repeating myself because I feel like I say it every week, is the tie, when you get to the deadline decision, the tie goes to sell. And that's to your point on man, the schedule is where if you aren't playing your best baseball, and let's be honest, they needed the bullpen and the rotation to be on the heaters when they got to this stretch, because even if the offense is swinging really well, which they have been for the month of June, they're going to get slowed down by Milwaukee's pitching staff, for example. Depending on how you draw the Braves might be able to slow you down a little bit. I'm not as confident in their rotation, but
and Chicago's rotation sucks. I know you didn't bring him up, but they're terrible.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention him because it's so bad, but yeah. But you just can't constantly be winning these games 8-6, right? I mean, it's not reasonable to ask that when you go up against this stretch. You could do that if you were playing, well, in theory, you could do that if you're playing a team like the Royals, but they didn't take advantage of that. So, yeah, I felt a little bit better 2 weeks ago before when we would look ahead and go, you know what, they're playing pretty well. I actually like their chances here, but it's hard to imagine that your bullpen, as we just talked about, you don't really have anybody you trust in it. You've got 2 spots in your rotation that are major question marks. It's hard to believe that suddenly those things are just going to magically turn it around and they're going to start pitching well against the Braves, Cubs, and Brewers. And if you fall apart, yeah, you're going to be a seller at the trade deadline. There's no way that if you're on the outside looking in, I don't see a scenario where if they're outside the playoff picture, Chaim's looking at it going, yeah, we should go buy. He's going to be having the conversations of, let's stick the course and sell a guy like Dustin May.
Cardinals' losses in the month of June include games in which they have scored 4 runs, 4 runs, 8 runs, 4 runs, 6, 5, and 4. Those are games you should win, man. That's what's frustrating about this is those games were against Texas, the Mets, the Twins, the Royals, and the Diamondbacks. These are either peer teams or teams that you should be better than. Based upon your performance so far this year, your record would indicate you're better than these teams that you're going up against. And because of the status of your rotation right now, and sometimes the bullpen plays into that as well, you're finding ways to lose those games. Those are games that they were winning at the beginning of the season. When they were scoring 4+ runs, they were consistently coming away with victories. And lately that just hasn't been the case for them. You can't write it in pen the way that you could earlier.
And the tough part is you're losing them early, too. I mean, you mentioned some of those games. They scored, 8 runs or whatever against Kansas City. They scored, I think, 4 last night against the Diamondbacks. Yeah, but Libby gives up 6 and 4 1/3. The previous start, it was, 6 in an inning and 2/3. And then you had May gives up 8 runs in, 2 innings. That so early on just immediately pulls you out of a baseball game. And as you mentioned when we were talking about Libby, then it just has that snowball effect. And I don't know that they've got many, in the bullpen at least, they don't have many more reinforcements down the minor leagues, right? They've tried it with Rajic in the bullpen. He's been kind of nice. Gastelum's maybe the only other arm that's down there that they could at least add to the 40-man if they felt like they needed a reinforcement. Really, the reinforcement is, are they going to replace Matthew Liberatore or not? And I hate to kind of circle him, but he feels like the biggest piece of That's where you need to make this upgrade before you get into the stretch where you're going up against these teams that are either right there with you in the wild card race or teams that are just better than you in the Braves and the Brewers.
Here's a stat that kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. Cardinals have scored 6 or more runs this season 30 times. That is tied for the 7th most in Major League Baseball. Same number of times as the Atlanta Braves and the Dodgers have scored 6 or more runs. The Dodgers and the Braves have combined to lose 3 of those games out of the 60 that they have played. How many do you think the Cardinals have lost? Again, Braves and Dodgers have each had 30 games in which they have scored 6 or more runs, and they've lost a combined 3 of them. So they are 57-3 when scoring 6 or more runs. What do you think the Cardinals' record is in those games?
They had at least 2 in Kansas City. I'll say, you said 30 games. I'll say they're 24-6.
Pretty close. 23-7 on the season.
Wow, that's a lot of losses.
For context,
That many runs.
That is 22nd in Major League Baseball in terms of the winning percentage. Only 5 other teams have lost more such games. It's Pittsburgh, Colorado, Washington, the Angels, and the Athletics. It's not the company that you want to be keeping if you're the St. Louis Cardinals. They've got to start taking care of those games. When you're scoring that number of runs, you've got to come away with a win, man. You just can't be losing those games, and they've done it consistently lately. You lost a game in Kansas City where you scored 6 runs, you gave up 14, and that was the Libby game, right? Yeah, that was the Liberatore game.
And I would have to think, and I'd have to go back and dig through the box score of those games that they've lost. My gut tells me that those are starter blowups. Now, the bullpen maybe didn't stop the bleeding like that Libby game. I think we had a debate in the text group chat about it. But at that point, I think Ollie was like, man, let's see if the bullpen can stop bleeding. They couldn't even stop the bleeding. But my gut tells me of those 7 losses that most of those, if not all of them, start with the starter just ends up being so bad early on, and then it snowballs from there. I don't think there's been a game where, oh, wow, Libby was good through 5, and the bullpen gives up 7 runs. I don't think that's happened this year that I can at least remember.
Yeah, so that's the thing they've got to get corrected. They've got to get this pitching figured out, and I think the way that you can start this all, to go with our theme of the show, it all begins with Matthew Liberatore. He was your opening day starter, and now he is the guy that probably should be removed in the rotation in order to fix some of the pitching issues that have been plaguing them. Coming up on the other side, we just talked about a player that we think should be removed from his current role. 2 guys have come up and have since earned their current opportunities. What does this mean in the long term for them? We'll talk about it next year on the Redbird Report. Blaze Jordan and Nathan Church have clearly carved out a role for themselves right now. Church is your current starting center fielder. Blaze Jordan is your current starting third baseman. And both have been hitting the heck out of the ball. Now, Blaze Jordan never walks. He is the exact same on-base percentage, basically, as he is batting average. So there's going to be some fluctuating in terms of what his overall OPS is if he continues to be that aggressive. But Nathan Church in the month of June is batting 350. He's got an OPS over 800, and he's still playing borderline Gold Glove caliber defense in center field. Guy's been great since coming back from the injured list. All of that is about what they're doing right now, though, T-Bone. What does this mean in the bigger picture? Can they carve out more significant roles for themselves long-term for the St. Louis Cardinals?
So I'll start with Nathan Church because I think he can carve out the role to be the everyday center fielder moving forward in the build. Because when you look at him now, I don't know if he's going to have to end up becoming a guy that walks. I know that's a thing that they're working on him with because does he chase a lot. But I look at him and I go, man, I could see what they sold us on at the beginning of the year, right? When we would have conversations in spring training, I'd go, Nathan Church, no way. But people around the club would say, hey, no, this might have been a little bit of a find for us, right? A guy that can maybe hit for some average. If he can be 10% below league average to about 10% above league average, somewhere in that range, while providing this level of defense in center field, yeah, that guy can carve out a role for you. Because you know what I just described? What they wanted Victor Scott to be. He's not going to have the speed to steal potentially 60 bases like Scott had. But I don't think they were necessarily looking for that from Victor Scott. They just wanted a guy that was not a black hole in the lineup and would play Gold Glove level defense and hit in the bottom part of the order. And I'm seeing that from Nathan Church. I think he's one that can definitely carve out a role for himself, because if it's not him, then I think the only other fallback option in center field in the long term for this build would be Victor Scott II. but I think you've lost a lot of confidence in his ability to get back here since you optioned him down to AAA. So I think Church can. Blaze is the one that I have a tough time with because though I said he's made the plays that are necessary at third base, I don't know that he will profile as a third baseman still because he just doesn't seem to have a ton of range. Now, maybe they'll say, look, Mason Wynn's over there on the left side of the infield. He can make up for some of the lack of that. Long as Blaze hits, he can play at third base. But my gut tells me they're going to put Urias there the moment he comes back from injury. So can he carve out a role for himself? I think he can. I don't know that it's going to be as a starter, though. I think Blaze's long-term future with the Cardinals is a guy that's kind of a right-handed bat that can play first/third, be DH type, maybe never a starter unless there's kind of injuries that play a role into that.
So my friend Kyle Reese, who does excellent work on the Cardinals prospects in the minor league system, brought this comparison up to me the other day, and I thought it was a really interesting one. He said, there's a little bit more David Freese to what we're seeing from Blaze Jordan than I think what people would probably expect. And I think it's really interesting, the comparison between the two. Now, David Freese is most remembered, of course, for what he did in that unbelievable run in 2011. But Freese carved out a heck of a Major League Baseball career for himself, man. Just an overall really good hitter, always fine defensively, like was capable of playing over there in the hot corner. And you never felt like you had an issue if he was your starting third baseman. A lot of teams would use him as, hey, we're going to use this as a placeholder for a couple of years before we get our long-term answer, right? Basically, everywhere he went, it was a 2-year stretch where he was with them. Why couldn't that be Blaze Jordan? Right? I don't know that he has all-star caliber upside. What you saw from David Freese in 2012, where he was 30% above league average, is that in his future? I don't know, maybe not. But I don't think it would shock anybody if he hit 20 home runs in a season. I don't think it would shock anybody if he hit for 1 year 290 overall. And if you do that, I mean, if you do it enough in the first half of the season, that could get you into that conversation, depending on how good the third base position is. And as we've seen, it ain't great right now in the National League. So I don't know. I found that comparison to be quite interesting. And if he can do something similar to what David Freese did in the regular season, using that as the comparison point, I do think he could be a 3 to 5 year starter for you. Maybe it's not always at third, but he could be a guy that you trust at that position.
Yeah, it's an interesting comp because you're right. Freese was never a guy that was like some Gold Glover that was going to be over there at third base. He kind of just made the plays that needed to be made, and then was always a guy that was just slightly above league average. And I think this is maybe the most important part. Now, I can't remember exactly where he would hit in his career, but if you've got a top 4 like the Cardinals have in your order, you don't have to ask him to do too much, right? Like where he's been hitting in the bottom half of your order, just make the necessary plays when they get hit to you at third base, and eventually Baez/Newt will always probably be your 5-hole hitter. That's the kind of guy that could definitely kind of work his way into playing here and being a starter at whatever position it may end up being that you never ask too much of, and then maybe he gets hot and he could put together, maybe he doesn't constantly put together the 2012 season, but could he do it once like David Freese did? It's possible. That's a very interesting comp for Blaze.
And the majority of David Freese's at-bats came batting 5th, 6th, or 7th. And I think that's what you're going to see for Blaze Jordan is probably in that 6 or 7 hole. So somewhere in that range, at least for a good team. I think that's where he should be expected to hit. And you look back at those teams for the Cardinals. I mean, I know baseball has changed, so maybe this is an unfair comparison. But you look back at 2011, 2013, go back to 2006 even. You need the supplemental talent. And ideally, supplemental talent that is on cheap, young, cost-controlled deals. And if they have flexibility of being able to be optioned up and down, even better. And that's where you're at right now with both Nathan Church and Blaze Jordan, is these are guys that are under team control for years to come. So even if they end up becoming, the players that fill the role that's currently held by Torres and Fermin, okay, great. You got it from your system, and now you don't have to pay $5 million to a free agent to come in and have that role on the bench. Think about how much money the Cardinals have spent over the last 5 years looking for some kind of a 4th outfielder or looking for some kind of a right-handed bat that can come off of the bench and can provide some thump. I mean, I would say on an average annual basis, they've spent about $10 million for those particular roles on the roster, and now you can get them for 2 between those two guys combined. So there's value there too. That $8 million can be spent now going to get a bullpen arm, because you can get really good bullpen arms for $8 million a year. So it allows them to construct the roster in a way that is better for the future. And it's all possible because this minor league system is providing the players that the Cardinals were lacking. I will say this. These are also the kind of players that the Cardinals have always been good at producing. For as much talk as there was about the failures in their system, they were still producing some pretty darn good utility guys. It was the stars that they lacked. And now you got J.J. Weatherholt and Jordan Walker, so it's working on both sides of things.
Yeah, and it just comes down to, can you develop that superstar? And we'll see. Jordan Walker might be the one. Hell, Ivan Herrera could be that guy too. Alec Burleson could be that guy. I mean, they've clearly, J.J. Weatherholt have created a couple of guys to give them out to that. But if you don't, then you have to go back to your old model, right? Like that. I'm looking at that 2012 team because you mentioned David Freese, Beltran, and Holiday were their two stars. Those guys weren't internal. Those guys weren't developed by you. But you know who was? Yadier Molina, John Jay, Alan Craig, Pete Cosma, Matt Carpenter, Skip Schumacher, like all those guys.
Go ahead and read off that 2013 rotation, because that's the other piece of that formula.
Yeah, that rotation as well. And I'm looking at 2012.
Okay.
But they had Loesch, who put together a very good year, Adam Wainwright, who was good, Lance Lynn.
Internal.
Jake Westbrook, external.
Yeah.
Jaime was internal. Joe Kelly was internal. So, they had the pitching pipeline churning through there. And that's before we even go through the bullpen, which was decent handful of guys that were internal as well. So that's where they have been, is always that, as much as they would sell it as, well, we would draft and develop our superstar. No, you draft and develop everything but the superstar, but you were willing to go out and get the superstar, which made everything fall into place properly.
And the exception, of course, is Albert and Yachty, early 2000s. Sure. That changed everything. But even with them, they also then acquire, they've got Jim Edmonds already on the team. They had Mark McGwire already on the team. And then they go get, whether it's Roland or going and getting a guy like Johnny Peralta in the early 2010s, Matt Holliday. They've always supplemented the internal options with somebody from the outside. And I think that's going to be the next step for them. But we'll see when that comes.
And as often as I have said, it's easier to develop those guys than it is to develop the superstar. I don't know. I look around the league and go, man, the Washington Nationals, we talked about them last year. Outside of Abrams, Woods, and their starting pitcher, Mackenzie Gore, every player on the roster was a negative WAR, essentially. Mm-hmm. So you can use those pieces and trade them away at some point. And that's where it will get interesting, is at some point, all of these pieces come together and you have to kind of pick and choose which one of these do we want to keep as the complementary pieces and which one are we willing to deal. It
felt all bad at the beginning of this show because, obviously the Liberatore conversation is the biggest one that's happening among Cardinals fans right now. And the last week, it hasn't been fun. It's not been a good brand of baseball. And it's really probably the first time for a full week that we've been able to say that about the Cardinals this year. You've had individual series where it feels that way, or individual games where it feels that way. Basically, since last Wednesday, the Cardinals have just played bad baseball for the most part. And that is a rarity. And I'm happy to say that it's been a rarity, but that's why it felt so bad for the most part today, talking about some of the stuff that we have. The fact that they still have all of these other positives, though, to point to, it is a good thing. It has not been a disaster of a season by any stretch of the imagination. We are recording this on Thursday, June the 25th. Tonight, the Cardinals are scheduled, at least, to play against the Arizona Diamondbacks. I don't know if that game is going to be played or not because of the weather, but after that, no matter what happens tonight, they've got 3 at home against the Miami Marlins. Then they have 3 on the road at the Atlanta Braves. This is a tough stretch for the St. Louis Cardinals, T-Bone. What are you looking for? What are you going to have your eye on over the next 6-7 days?
The main thing for me is going to be focusing in on their pitching as a unit, and then you can really hone in on Matthew Liberatore when he gets his next start against the Atlanta Braves. But, these are not going to be slump busters that you're going against, and your pitching is going into this tough stretch at its lowest point of the season. So it's the biggest thing to monitor because Miami's got pretty good pitching. You're going to avoid, it looks like they're big dogs. You're not going to run into Alcantara. It looks like you're going to run into Meyer, Phillips. They haven't even named a starter for Saturday. So you're going to avoid some of their big guys. You're going to run into some of the worst arms in the Atlanta staff. But the thing is okay, the offense has been doing its job, as we've talked about. Is the rotation going to give you a chance? The Marlins are a feisty little bunch down there. in Miami, and we all know what Atlanta is capable of. So the rotation and the bullpen are the two things that I think you have to hone in on here. And if the bullpen can kind of get it going, they might be able to help you out. If they can pitch like they did in May, and you still are getting some shorter starts from your starters, you can maybe shorten up some games and actually be able to get through this okay. But one of those has got to get going. You cannot have both the rotation and bullpen slumping at the same time.
Atlanta has quietly hit the skids when it comes to their offense over the last 30 days or so. They were 45-21 on June 7th. They are now 48-31. So they're 3-10 in their last 13 games.
I could be wrong, but I don't think you're going to see Acuna when you play them in the first series because of his issue.
There you go.
I think hamstring.
So you might be getting them at the quote unquote right time. Now they're still a good baseball team. It's going to be a tough series. The one that I think is going to be pretty telling is against Miami, because that is a good pitching staff that's coming to town, and their offense has been performing very well. They do not have a whole lot of name recognition in their lineup, but they've got a few dudes that are putting together some really good seasons. Lopez, for example, that guy's a legit all-star candidate with the way that he's been performing so far this year. I'm very curious to see how the Cardinals' rotation does against that particular lineup. So that's going to be it for me. That's the biggest thing that I'm honing in on is what do you look like against these peer teams? The Miami Marlins right now are one of your peers. And if they can win 2 out of 3 in that stretch, they can be right there neck and neck with you in the wild card race once again.
What's your prediction for this? Let's take out the Arizona game that may or may not happen tonight as we're recording. What's your prediction in these 6 games?
3-3. They go 500.
I think they go 2-4. I think it's gonna. I don't know that the pitching is gonna right itself. I think they drop 2 or 3 to Miami and drop 2 or 3 to Atlanta. And there's going to be some tough conversations starting to pop up when we record next Thursday.
All that lies ahead is a weekend over the 4th of July weekend at Wrigley. What could go wrong? That's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Appreciate you guys tuning in. As we ask each and every week, please rate, review, and subscribe to the videos over on the YouTube page. That helps us out so much. It helps us spread this to others that have not yet seen the Redbird Report. So if you could do that for us, please do so. Also, if you want to see the audio side of things, and that's easier for you, check us out on the podcast page as well, 101ESPN.com. You can check out the free 101 ESPN app as well. It's free to download. Appreciate Noah for helping us out on the video side of things. We will be back with you guys again next week here on the Redbird Report.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.